So if you have been playing Honkai Stereo, you've probably came across something like this.
Of course. This would be a romantic allegory like none that has been told before. You think so too, right?
Disclaimer, this video will not contain any leaks nor talk about what Cyrene does, purely just discussing the general sentiments HSR players have towards Cyrene's kit, as well as my personal 2 cents regarding everything that's been going on. Hey guys, MrPokke here, and unless you are completely living under a rock, the Cyrene memes have taken over social media for the past couple of days as of the time of this recording, sparking an almost unprecedented level of discussion within the community ever since Asterisk's global passive. If you thought Savrija was doom posted before her release, then you could say Cyrene's doom posting is the atomic bomb that's about to be dropped into the Chrysoteres and revive Iron Tomb, putting an end to the universe itself. As for myself, I'm the HSR guy that constantly gets 1% or underreacting to things on the internet.
The greatest, unrelatable Honkai star rail player that has ever lived.
And aside from that, I've been pretty much playing this game every single day since launch and covered every single unit in the game for the past 2.5 years, and this is the first time I've ever made a video like this discussing the sentiments people have over Cyrene, or particularly a unit before the livestream itself. To first understand where all these memes come from and what they represent, you don't really need to know what Cyrene actually does, but rather what she represents as a unit. Picture this, she is the final unit of Enforcers, the crescendo to the end of the symphony that has been playing since 3.0, the literal wife in Honkai Impact 3 with one of the most popular fandom in Hoyoverse itself. To say that Cyrene has an unprecedented level of hype is an understatement, because Hoyo has never hyped out a unit this long until its official release, especially with Enforcers being HSR's longest story, both version-wise as well as length-wise. Players has been expecting a literal god to descend Enforcers and completely shatter the meta and ban everything around to her existence, similar to how Teep as well as E1 Teep or Hyacinth's impact has been, except Cyrene might not be living up to that expectation. So how exactly did this happen in the first place? And here's exactly where the problem lies: expectations. People have been expecting a lot out of Cyrene because, let's be real, the amount of story, lore, character, ties with the Honkai IP, and hints that she will literally change everything has been building on for quite a while now. This is partly seen from HSR meta being slightly shaped around the flavor of the MSQ, looking at Acro and Firefly back in version 2, and now the Castrish squad in version 3. Cyrene, to put it into rough terms, have been expected to be the unit that completely elevates every single Chrysoteres to the next level, because she's pretty much like the Mavueka of Netland, except it's gonna be for Enforcers. This doesn't have anything to do with meta or power creep or HP inflation, it is simply because she is Cyrene, plain and simple. If there is a single unit in the entire Enforcers arc that can and should be the one that power creeps everyone in the roster, it must be Cyrene. If no other units are gonna make it past 1 year, Cyrene has to be the universal support that has infinite shelf life. If I'm committing into any version 3 DPS and EA vertical investment, Cyrene must be the one to take them to the next level into version 4, just like how Sunday brought so many of the older units into version 3. Except players are realizing she might not be what they expected in the first place. You know what they say, the higher the expectations, the higher the disappointment. And again, I'm not covering leakers here, but Cyrene is probably not as what people expected, which in turn made people lead to all of these posts saying that she's literally unplayable, the worst support, the first mass skip unit in HSR history. Worst of all, people are saying the only fix to Cyrene's entire kit is to pull for her by E1 Tribbie, and Hoyo Grid has essentially ruined my waifu. Now for context, I've never personally played with Cyrene myself, so I will not say if their opinions are valid or invalid, but again, that's not the main point. The main point is, regardless if Cyrene is truly deserving of getting doom posted or if she's overhated, this still led to a situation where we have today, with hundreds if not thousands of Cyrene memes flooding social media, essentially making her one of, if not the most doom posted unit in HSR history, having millions of views in Cyrene main subreddit literally begging CN players to complain and voice up hoping that she can receive any changes before the live version. And even taking a look at Bilibili, the voices are also starting to rise up from the CN community as well. So in summary, the majority of HSR's community opinion over Cyrene is rather negative, to say the least, and this is the part where I come in. So to tackle this question, is this fair? And let's just get down to the uncomfortable truth. Gacha players are driven by emotion, not by logic. Cyrene as a unit being broken or mid, as well as the overall responses players have, is ultimately the representation of how HSR players perceive meta in their own biases. Plain and simple. You cannot objectively say there is no bias for Cyrene compared to other units and Euphorias because her entire character development has been written with that much more effort and depth to everyone else. To say that you have no bias for Cyrene would either mean you skip the story and have no idea who is Elias and Honkai Impact 3, or you're simply lying. But the best part is, that is completely fine. It is completely fine to show bias for certain units because this is a gacha game we're playing at the end of the day. It is completely fine to expect the unit that you have seen being written as your favorite fictional character being strong in the meta itself. And at the end of the day, some units will get more development than others because some are side characters and some are main characters. It is what it is. It's like expecting someone to have the same level of bias for Gojo and this guy from Kyoto Class B. Like, who is bro? The devs have written a story and grabbed your attention and interest for a specific unit more than others, and in this case, Cyrene. So can you imagine if Jujutsu Kaisen has a gacha game and they release Gojo as a side grade to bro over here? People will understandably be upset and expect better performances from the man that's been hyped up in the entire series. On the flip side, I doubt there will be as many people betting an eye if the situation was reversed and bro was the one that isn't performing as well or even worse than Gojo. So imagine if the roles were reversed but in HSR perspective and Cyrene was released with the exact same kit as like Tribbie or any other support, while Tribbie was swapped over to whatever she has right now. Chances are the community and the memes generated will not be anywhere near this level, likely around the same caliber as Ceridra before she got launched, which also received her fair amount of Doom posting. Which, speaking of, looking at where that turned out now for Ceridra, her performance is actually a lot better than what the Doom posters have been saying. So now that you have acknowledged that players generally have a bias for Cyrene, which is why it creates the inherent unfair expectations that Cyrene would have over other units, and this is where we can take a look at things from a more logical perspective instead of an emotional one. Now, as someone that has been playing this game for a long time, and I say hundreds if not thousands of hours all into endgame content and everything that has been revolving around the different units, I would probably know how meta works in HSR at least a little bit more than your casual player base. So for context, I have my own account with every single unit with good vertical investments, and I have a free-to-play account that's been cooking pretty well since the start of Euphorias, so my thoughts and consensus about pooling decisions and vertical investments have a pretty long horizon for both free-to-plays as well as spending players even beyond version 3. So from this part on, I am no longer viewing Cyrene as a big Aboba Mimi Y Honkai Impact 3 Eliza simp. I am simply looking at Cyrene just like any other unit, basing purely on her performance and what she brings to the team, plain and simple. With regards to Cyrene's actual kit, again, this video has no leaks at all whatsoever, so please wait until our early access video in the future, but it will be just purely my analysis on how Hoyo has been doing their banners for the past 2.5 years. Cyrene as the final Chrysos heir and the unit in our 1-year Euphorias cinema marks the end to our Flame Chase journey and Era Nova as a whole. Since the next update has been definitively revealed to be going back to Penacony, as well as Daria at the time of Richard Connie has also been revealed, you could say Cyrene is the final installment for the Chrysos heirs since everyone has pretty much been revealed at this point. And this brings me to the most important question I would ask myself as a player. Remember when Sunday and Field released back in version 2.7 before version 3? Who do you think Cyrene is going to be? Sunday or Fuke? And whichever the answer is going to be, is it a good or a bad thing? Now, the reason why I want to ask this Sunday or Fuke question is because if you have been paying attention to the HSR banners ever since the start of the game, they have been kind of following the same cycle every single version, but each to their different flares. Version 1 was the start of the game, so it's very broad. Players are basically just teaming the toes, and Rame was a universal support in version 1.6 that pivoted extremely well into version 2 and even until version 3. Version 2 ended with Fuke and Sunday, with Fuke improving the flare of the version 2 units that was super rigged, and Sunday improving pretty much every single crit DPS and even more units in version 3 like Aglaia, Anaxa, as well as Mighty. Now that version 3 is coming to an end with Cyrene being the final unit in Euphorias, then the whole cycle is most likely going to be repeating itself again. Now, even though we do have a 3.8 patch, which is technically the last batch of this entire version, Euphorias as a whole has pretty much ended with Cyrene, just like how Penacony ended with Sunday and Fuke, and Space Station ending with Run Mate. So here is the thing. If Cyrene is going to be a Sunday, this means that she can make all of our older units, especially those before version 3, even stronger to match up going into the upcoming version 4. This means that she has the potential to bridge a gap closer to version 4, just like how Sunday bridged a gap for so many older DPSs into our current version. If Cyrene is however going to be a Fuke, this means that she will add a greater power spike to the flare of the current version, which is version 3 for Casuals and their friends, but the drawback is that the most shield version uptype in this current patch is also going to be the one that falls the hardest in future version, just like how I can see Super Break fell the hardest out of every single version 2 archetype. So at this point you might be wondering, if Cyrene is going to be a Sunday, she will probably be way better in terms of value and longevity because she's a universal support and lasts longer. Well, actually not exactly the case. Even though Fuke and Super Break as a whole has fell off the most important thing to note is this: those teams that still play Super Break to this day almost exclusively all run Fuke. And I think this is something that a lot of players fail to realize, and they purely focus on whether a support is going to be a universal support, how well they can use the other units, instead of just looking at the cost that players have already invested. Even though you could say that Sunday aged way better than Fuke since he integrated seamlessly with the version 3 units, all of the Super Break teams that you're going to be seeing now are pretty much on Fuke at the same time. Whether or not Super Break as an archetype has fell off isn't part of Fuke's concern, and neither is it the player's concern. It is purely based on the rotating endgame environment, and frankly speaking, that's pretty much up to HSR. What players can control, however, is how to make the right investments for the teams that they have already put to make the strongest version of themselves going forward into the future version, considering the strategies they have spent in the gacha game is never going to come back. So if let's say that someone has already invested into a E2 Firefly and an E1 Rame, would you really tell them to skip Fuke and restart from scratch all over for 0 strategies and build a brand new team in version 3, or in this case version 4? The moment you want to invest in anything for HSR, one of, if not the most important thing, is to stick to the end, especially as a free-to-play. You cannot be pulling for every single DPS and expect them to last without vertical investments, because that is literally how you run out of strategies the moment you lose 50-50 or you get tempted by a brand new DPS archetype. And that's also how your accounts gets bricked up, and that's when power creep in this game is going to be a problem for you, yada yada yada, and I cannot stress this enough for all the free-to-plays. As such, the exact same situation can be deduced onto Cyrene herself. If let's say she is really going to be the version 3 Fuke, where she has a hyper specialized roles limited to only select teams, would you really skip her and completely start a fresh team in version 4 if you already invest in set teams? Now, there's no right answer for every single player because it will ultimately depend on your box. So if you want a little bit more answer for that, join our Discord, leave a comment on the kind of stuff. I'll try to help whenever I can, but we will get there once our entire kit is revealed. But my bottom line is pretty much going to be this: for someone that's already invested into multiple cores, like 4 cores, 5 cores, 6 cores into a version 3 team, are you okay with letting go of version 3 completely and starting fresh from scratch in version 4 again? Because at that point, you're going to be investing in another, I would dare say, 3, 4, 5, or maybe even 6 cores for a new version all over again, instead of pulling for this key unit that would have the potential to bring your version 3 team a lot more powerful going into version 4. Because the strategy you have spent, it is pretty much not going to be coming back. So at the end of the day, opportunity cost, opportunity cost. Now, another question I kind of want to tackle is going to be this Tribbie Sidegrade comparison. Players are saying she's at best a Tribbie Sidegrade and at worst a Tribbie downgrade, especially with E1 Tribbie. So now that we have discussed why Fuke isn't necessarily a worse pool than Sunday for longevity, what if it turns out that this Fuke in question might not even be better than the other Fuke? So imagine if you pulled Fuke back then and you couldn't even outperform Rame, but luckily for Super Breakers, you can just run both at the same time. But for Cyrene, this might not be the case depending on the teams you're running her with. But let's just use Casuals as an example because she's pretty much version 3's Firefly as we've seen by now. Casuals right now has Evernight, Tribbie, and Hyacinth as her current best in slot. So in this scenario, who would you remove for Cyrene? Or do you even add Cyrene in the first place? Hyacinth and Casuals are pretty much perma-fixed, so it's basically just Evernight and Tribbie over here. Now, I personally don't see Evernight getting replaced due to Remember's flagship with more movement spreads for more effective HP as well as the overall synergy, so it is almost definitively going to be Tribbie. Now, at this point, can an E0 Cyrene compete with an E0 or even a E1 Tribbie? Once again, no leakers, but the way I see it, If she is better than the Tribbie, then Cyrene's pool value will 100% be there for you if you decide to main casuals because it is an upgrade, plain and simple. If she is Sidegrade or even potentially worse than E1 Tribbie, it will still have a really good amount of value because you can now open your Tribbie to Team 2 or even Team 3, especially with anomaly arbitration. And one thing to consider is everyone has been hoping for a Tribbie secondary one to get another second Tribbie on that kind of stuff, and now there is a chance that Cyrene might actually be the one. As of right now, Tribbie's value is extremely high because of all of our endgame content with the ability to scale well into AoE, but there's ironically a potential massive flaw in Tribbie's kit that hasn't really been exposed up until recently. Tribbie's utility, especially with her E1, is to convert all of the damage from your mobs into the one with the highest effective HP, which is where a smart damage distribution comes in to always ensure the highest HP target will receive the highest amount of damage. But what if there's gonna be a scenario when there's an untargetable or infinite HP mod that's gonna be introduced, effectively directing Tribbie's damage away from the boss itself? Now, another scenario which is going to be a little bit more likely is to simply make a single or dual target environment, which greatly reduces Tribbie's utility and energy charge as a whole. Now remember, HSR's meta is not defined by units, it is defined by environments. Repeat after me, HSR's meta is not defined by units, it is defined by the environment. MrPokke 2024 PSB has been saying this ever since Rubric has been a thing. All it takes for someone to fall in or out of the meta is really just an enemy swap, plain and simple, or a brand new mechanic to greatly increase or reduce a unit's value, and Tribbie is no exception. Heck, look at what happened to Robin, and without E2 Robin nowadays, you probably see a lot less energy regeneration because we don't really get it as frequently compared to way back in version 2 back in the start, or when we have a lot of full-up attack team comps. When Event 3 nowadays also cannot really keep up the amount of sustain anymore unless they're going to be spamming skill points, which is where highest in DHP is going to be helping you a lot. Ultimately, this question isn't a matter of Cyrene being better or worse than Tribbie, it is a matter of if your box needs Tribbie and Cyrene at the same time. You aren't just pulling for Cyrene, you are pulling for the option of opening up team building for other units, which is why HSR is a team building game, and players who look down at HSR's difficulty often fall short at the very first step, which is knowing which units do you even want to pull in the first place. And with that, we pretty much come to one of our final discussions today, which is going to be the Eidolon benefits. If you know what units to pull, what about their respective Eidolons? Because at the end of the day, they are pretty much just +1 unit or +2 unit. And this is also another huge reason why Cyrene is getting a backlash this much, because her kit is getting massive upgrades from her potential early Eidolons, a little bit similar to Aglaia when she first launched back in version 3.0 without her E1 S1. If Cyrene really needs 2 or even 3 cores to become an upgrade, then ask yourself this. Do you really need to invest in that amount of cost to make her great? Now, I personally think that locking units behind Eidolons a little bit easier to pull, especially for my free-to-play account, because it's a little bit like an all-or-nothing scenario, or basically a high-stakes poker. If you can't even afford an entry fee, then is it really worth it for you to risk that much? Because at the end of the day, gacha games, they are not stock markets because you can never earn money the longer you hold on to your stellar jades or have more Eidolons. You decide if you can commit that many costs in order to truly make a team pop off, and even then, the question is how long? I've been a firm advocate for pulling Eidolons and Litecoins even as a free-to-play because it's far better long-term to have limited units with high investments than a white card with close to no vertical investments. But of course, I play with min-max on my mind. If let's just say Cyrene is going to be an E2 baseline benchmark to even perform and compete with the units that we have right now, I will first ask, how much is she going to be bringing at that level of investment? And secondly, how long will she remain relevant at that number of costs? Generally speaking, I wouldn't want to allocate too many costs for DPS because they have the hardest time pivoting to a different team. So if Cyrene should end up being a support with a good potential of carrying my team comfortably into version 4, then I would say that 3 costs on a, let's just say, E2 Cyrene will be well worth over, let's just say, an E0 Phanon, E0 Saber, and whatever first 4.0 E0 unit is going to be. If HSR is going to be locking a massive power upgrade behind the unit's E2, yup, we can all acknowledge gacha companies are being very greedy over here. It is what it is. I never knew, oh my goodness. But it is a far more important thing as a player to see if the environment is shifting alongside with the E2 power spike. It is less so comparing if Cyrene needs E2 to work, but more so if her E2 is worth it, considering we have 2 costs potentially allocated into 2 version 4 units. And again, it's ultimately dependent on your account and what you have. Now, the biggest concern with this entire allocating the E2 Cyrene already go that much with Cyrene is that, like I mentioned just now, if Cyrene is gonna end up being a Fuke, it means that vertical investment for Cyrene is probably gonna be limited into the entire Chrysos Hair archetype as a whole, and that is gonna be version 3 units exclusively, unless we ever go back and forth again in a version 4, a version 4.8, or maybe a version 5.8, whatever it's gonna be. It's very, very unlikely that we're gonna be seeing new Chrysos Hair added into the edition, which can allow Cyrene pivot a little bit better compared to others. So for example, if we're gonna be releasing like a additional Nihility DPS or brand new DOT DPS, it is gonna be easier for their relevant supports to pivot as well. But for Cyrene, because her pool of DPS is pretty much always fixed, you can see it from past performances. If a DPS is gonna be remaining the same throughout time, then eventually there might just be a DPS that does something even better with an even better support. Case in point, Jing Yuan as well as Babin, right? Jing Yuan with Babin was very, very good, especially with Sunday. Sunday worked perfectly with Jing Yuan, but eventually there's an even better Jing Yuan coming out, and that's gonna be Eidolon, which also just so happened to yoink your Sunday and Babin away, leaving Jing Yuan back in the dust. So if Cyrene is gonna be a support that's gonna be catering exclusively to version 3 units, could there be another DPS that could allow Cyrene to pivot into a future team again while leaving behind the older DPSs? This is ultimately also at the end of the day gonna be depending on the developers. I don't really know how it's gonna be the case because, you know, as we've seen it, Chrysos has pretty much come to the end of the journey, which is why one of the concerns of players as well is how can Cyrene pivot for future versions. So with that, I've pretty much come to the end of the entire Cyrene situation explained, as well as my 2 cents going forward. I'm very, very open to discussion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, because I think this is an extremely, extremely interesting topic. As a whole, I really want to look forward to see what our kit is actually going to entail from the live stream as well as the early access server. So stay tuned for that. And until then, I think this entire thing has just been, you know, it was absolute cinema because I've never seen anything quite like this. More so about the memes, less about the unit kit itself. So that's pretty much it, right? With that, role today is gonna be Memmy. Join Twitch, join Discord, join the YouTube code, perfect 10 gamers up. All the best of you. See you guys. Yeah.